Paul Davies is, as I said, an internationally acclaimed physicist, cosmologist, and astrobiologist at Arizona State University, where he runs the pioneering program Beyond Center for Fundamental Concepts in Science. Paul is the author of more than 20 books, including the bestseller, The Mind of God, About Time, How to Build a Time Machine, and The Goldilocks Enigma. One of my favorites is this research textbook in physics on curved spacetime, electrodynamics and curved spacetime. The asteroid 19920G was officially renamed Paul Davies in his honor. Paul is a long-standing friend of CTNS through his participation in several of our research conferences and his being the CTNS J.K. Russell Fellow in Religion and Science in 2003. For the past 3 decades, though, he has been closely involved with SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Life Intelligence, and he now chairs the SETI Post-Detection Task Force, charged with deciding what to do if we're confronted with evidence of alien life. This evening, we'll hear Paul's keynote lecture, Are We Alone in the Universe? How the search for ET can and should be ramped up. As Paul stresses, after a half century of scanning the skies, astronomers have little to report but an eerie silence. Eerie because many scientists are convinced that the universe is teeming with life. According to Paul, the problem is we've been looking in the wrong place at the wrong time. Tonight, he'll offer a new and exciting roadmap for the future. So please join me in welcoming my good friend, Paul Davies.
Bob, that is so kind. And I want to start by saying, first of all, that the CTNS is an astonishing organization. I guess I want to say it's unique. There may be other organizations like it in other countries. But over many years, it has fostered the scholarly debate and interaction between, broadly speaking, the sciences and religion and theology, at a time when there's been a great deal of acrimony in some circles. There are people who think that there should not be a constructive engagement between these two different disciplines. And I think it's terrific that Bob and his team have continued unfazed by some of that unpleasantness and continue to pursue the path of scholarly inquiry and engagement. And it's a privilege to be here again, lecturing in that forum, and a privilege to support the Ian Barber Chair. Ian Barber is regarded by some people as the founder of the discipline of science and religion, if we may call it that. He was writing papers on the interaction between these two at a time when very few people were paying attention. And so it is wonderful to think that with a little bit more effort, the CTNS will be able to not only have a chair that is named after him, but will also secure its own future by having a permanent position in this important area of scientific inquiry. Now, as Bob mentioned, I'm a starman. I've been part of the STARS initiative. We had a very pleasant time, I think, in Cancun 2 years ago, was it? But not only a pleasant time, a very interesting time, because it involved assembling, I think in total over the three events, probably about 100 or 150, maybe more, scientists, philosophers, and theologians to tackle all manner of important topics on the interface of science and religion. So that's just a little preamble. So to turn to tonight's event, the question of whether or not we're alone in the universe is surely one of the oldest that human beings have ever asked. But for most of human history, it's remained squarely in the province of religion and philosophy. But 50 years ago, this very month, it became part of science, when a then little-known astronomer by the name of Frank Drake decided to start sweeping the skies with a radio telescope in the hope, some might say forlorn hope, of picking up a signal from some extraterrestrial civilization. This wasn't conducted in an idle moment. There was already some thought given during the 1950s to how this might be possible. Radio telescopes can be built so big and are so sensitive, they have the power to communicate with each other across interstellar distances. And so in a landmark paper published in the journal Nature in 1959, Giuseppe Ciccone and Philip Morrison from MIT suggested that maybe somebody should try looking to see if ET was beaming messages our way. And whilst they pointed out that, of course, this was an enormous long shot, they also pointed out that if nobody tried, then the chances of success are precisely zero. And so the young Frank Drake took up the challenge, and I've dedicated my book to him because what an extraordinary visionary he is. And he's still in the game 50 years on. I just saw him recently in London. We went out to dinner together. He's as upbeat as ever. He's still a practicing SETI astronomer. And there can't be many people who design an experiment, run it for 50 years, get a null result, and are still upbeat about the future. So SETI is the long-term quest par excellence. It is a search, as they say, for a needle in a haystack, but in this case without any guarantee that there's even a needle out there. So I want to take you through some of the issues and address the question, does the eerie silence mean that we are, in fact, alone in the universe, or, as Bob said in his introduction, maybe looking for the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time? Well, here's a picture of Frank Drake back in 1960, April 1960, with the Green Bank radio telescope, the beginning of the pioneer quest, that has now grown into an international effort, made famous, I think, by the Hollywood movie starring Jodie Foster in the role of the starstruck astronomer who finally picks up the message from the aliens. This was based on the novel by Carl Sagan, and he, probably more than anybody else, the charismatic champion of SETI, put this subject on the map. Today, it involves some of the world's largest radio telescopes. This, for example, is the Parkes radio telescope in Australia, in New South Wales, in Australia, famous from the movie The Dish. Some of you may have seen that, and it's still used from time to time for SETI searches in the southern hemisphere. This is the Arecibo radio telescope, also in the movies, not only the one I just mentioned, starring Jodie Foster, that's Contact, but also the James Bond movie, GoldenEye. So you know you can take a scientific establishment seriously when it appears in James Bond. The jewel in the crown of SETI research is shown here. This is the so-called Allen Telescope Array. It's being built in Northern California, and when it's completed, there will be 350 of these rather shoddy-looking dishes. And shoddy is the word. The whole point is they're cheap and cheerful, and in radio astronomy, that's all that matters, because the electronic wizardry and the software that is available these days means that you can take instruments of this sort and integrate the data from them and have, in effect, a collecting area enormously large, and this system, when it's completed with all 350 dishes, will have great sensitivity. It will enable the SETI astronomers to search a much bigger volume of the Milky Way galaxy for incoming signals. Now, it's called the Allen Telescope Array because it's paid for in part by Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft, and we look forward to its completion. So what does this eerie silence mean? Could it mean that we are, in fact, alone in the universe? We can't be sure. It's impossible, of course, to prove a negative. The absence of evidence is not the same as the evidence of absence. We may search for 1,000 years and not get any inkling, just hearing the hiss and crackle of static from space. We couldn't rule out the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. But the time would surely come when people would get discouraged. Even Frank Drake would think maybe his attention would be better turned to something else. Now, 50 years is, of course, not long enough to say we are alone or we're on a hiding to nothing, but it is a great time to take stock. And what I wanted to do in my book was not just write a sort of congratulatory retrospective on 50 years of heroic effort by a small band of radio astronomers, but to take a good, long, hard look at the entire SETI program and at the assumptions underlying it, and ask the question, could we look for ET in other ways too? That is, whilst the SETI astronomers continue their quest, are there other things we might be doing, things that perhaps are more likely to succeed? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Now, there's a fundamental problem that underpins the entire Carl Sagan contact scenario. So you will remember, probably either from listening to Sagan himself or watching the movie, that it's predicated on the assumption that ET is deliberately beaming messages to us, that is, messages crafted for mankind aimed at Earth. Wouldn't that be nice? All we would have to do is to guess where they're coming from, point the radio telescopes in the right direction, tune into the right station, and pick up the message. The tuning in part is largely taken care of. They are able to monitor up to 1 billion radio channels simultaneously. So no longer do we have to second guess what frequency ET likes to transmit on. But nevertheless, we still need to know where to point and when to point. And the problem here is very easily stated. Supposing we ask a SETI optimist, how far away is the nearest civilization likely to be? Now, you can't get much more optimistic than Frank, and Frank estimates 10,000 civilizations in the galaxy at this time with radio transmitting capability, 10,000. Now, that's a sort of arbitrary number because it's a total guess. We'll see in a moment what the uncertainties are. But let's take Frank's number and ask, well, if there are 10,000 in the galaxy, and there are hundreds of billions of stars in the galaxy, so 10,000 is a very small fraction of stars, but if we take 10,000, the nearest one in round figures is likely to be 1,000 light years away. Now, if you're 1,000 light years away from Earth, you see Earth not as it is today, but it was as it was 1,000 years ago. And there were no radio telescopes 1,000 years ago. In fact, for us to be picking up a message now from a civilization 1,000 light years away, they would have to transmit it when they could see Earth as it was in the year 10 AD, at the time of Christ. Now, if they had super-duper instruments, they might be able to see the pyramids and the Great Wall of China, for example, and they might be able to figure that any millennium soon there would be radio telescopes on Earth. And put yourself in the position of a SETI enthusiast on this hypothetical civilization, going to his funding body and saying, there's that really interesting planet Earth over there. We know there's intelligent life on Earth. We think any millennium soon they're going to have radio telescopes and could pick up our messages. Could we have some money, please, to start transmitting to them? And I know what they would say. I can tell you that the grant funding agency would come back and say, great idea. You come back in a few thousand years when you know they're actually on the air, and then we will start sending our messages. When will they know that? Well, nothing travels faster than light, and they will know we have radio technology when they get our first radio signals. If they've got sensitive enough equipment, and I have to say it will be very sensitive indeed, at 1,000 light years to pick up Marconi, but you can see the point I'm trying to make. It will be at least another 900 years before they know that we are using radio. And then, of course, it would take another 1,000 years for their message to reach us. So this way of searching for ET might be a good idea in a couple of thousand years, but today I think we have to question whether this is the best strategy. So does that mean we give up doing Radio SETI? Not a bit of it. I hope they carry on, and I hope they carry on doing it better. But we have to change tack a bit. And one of the things we can do is, I believe, abandon the idea of deliberately directed messages and look instead for different types of messages. In fact, I want to make the point in this lecture, the general point, that answering the question, are we alone in the universe, is the most pressing thing scientifically, and I would have to say theologically, the most pressing question. Getting the message, downloading cosmic wisdom, if you like, is a bonus, a secondary thing. I would be thrilled if during my lifetime we could unequivocally say we are not alone in the universe, even if we can't say very much about the extraterrestrial beings. So all we really need is a signature of extraterrestrial intelligence, which means, in effect, a signature of extraterrestrial technology. We just need to see a technological footprint out there somewhere in the galaxy. We don't actually have to have a message. Now, one way we might see that footprint is if the aliens, instead of sending directed messages, have built a beacon. We're familiar with beacons. Lighthouses are beacons, and the lighthouse keeper doesn't expect a reply. The lighthouse sweeps the horizon with a beam of light, and then if you look in the direction of the lighthouse, you see it repeating, a flash, and then a few moments later another flash, and so on. We can imagine that an alien civilization may have built a repeating beacon like that somewhere in the galaxy. Where would we look? Where's a good place to look? Well, maybe towards the center of the galaxy. That's where most of the stars are. It's also where most of the old stars are. And we're sort of assuming that ET is paying for all this, and so we want to go where the oldest and the richest civilizations are located, the best resourced, those likely to be motivated. It could be, if we picked up a beacon, it would be from a long vanished civilization. They are no longer here, and they've left it as a monument. It could be a monument, it could be a warning, it could be a cheery hello, it could be a pointer to Encyclopedia Galactica, a place where we can turn our radio telescopes to and tune in and download the whole thing. So it may just be a first step on the road to a one-way communication. It could, interestingly enough, be an artistic or even a religious symbol. It could be a statement of some sort that is totally beyond our ken, but nevertheless would suffice for us to say, that looks fishy, that can't be natural, there must be alien technology at work. The difficulty about looking for beacons is that they may repeat only after a very long period of time. It's a big galaxy, and if you want to irradiate it with sufficient energy, you're going to have to sweep it rather slowly. It may take months or years for the thing to repeat. So if you just see it once, it's just something that goes bleep in the night, a transient event, and radio astronomers often see such transient events. There's a famous one called the WOW signal. You can read about it in my book. Nobody could explain that, but nobody's seen anything from that part of the sky again. So we need a dedicated search to be able to look at a particular patch of sky, preferably the whole sky, but continuously for months or years on end. That technology will come, but it's not available at the moment. Now, this is Frank Drake today, standing in front of his eponymous equation, the Drake equation. You will read about it a lot of places. What is this equation? Well, it's not an equation in the usual physics sense of the term. It's not E equals mc squared type of equation. It's really a list of things we don't know. The number on the left, n, is the number of communicating civilizations in the galaxy at this time. Frank is giving the figure 10,000. You arrive at that figure by guessing the numbers on the right-hand side. The first of these is the rate of star formation. That's a number we now know rather well. It wasn't known quite so well when Frank began this. It's about 7, 8, 9 stars per year on average in the galaxy. The next number is the fraction of stars that have planets. Now, a few years ago, nobody knew what that number was, but today we're building up a catalogue of planets going around other stars. This is all very new. There have been about 450 discovered so far. And the one that comes after that, n sub e, is the number of those planets that are Earth-like, other Earths, if you like. And this subject is being advanced enormously by this mission here called Kepler. It's a space-based mission. It's a satellite that is staring at a large group of stars continuously for a number of years, and it's looking for the faint dimming of those stars as the planets that go around them by chance pass across the face of the star. That will always happen to some fraction. And it has the capability of detecting Earth-like planets going around Sun-like stars. So we eagerly await a catalogue of potential other Earths, the real estate on which ET might have taken up residence. So that part is looking good. We can be pretty confident that there are 1 billion or more other Earths out there in the Milky Way galaxy. But now we hit the fundamental problem of this entire enterprise and what I want to tell you most about this evening. And that is the conflation of those two words, habitable and inhabited. They don't mean the same thing. But many journalists conflate the two. You will read many statements, in fact, many scientists conflate the two. You will read statements along the lines, we've seen a planet with such and such a property, it could have liquid water, therefore we expect there will be life on it. Just because a planet is like the Earth doesn't mean it's going to be inhabited. That's to confuse a necessary with a sufficient condition. Of course, it's necessary if you want Earth-type life, to have an Earth-type planet. But it's by no means sufficient, because it makes an assumption about the next term in Drake's equation, F sub L, the fraction of Earth-like planets on which life emerges. What is that number? Frank and Carl Sagan and most set enthusiasts assume that that number is roughly 1. That is, that given another Earth, sooner or later, life will obligingly pop up. Do we know that? That's the key assumption of the whole thing. Now, let me say right at the outset that when I got interested in this subject, I was a student in London. So many decades ago, you wouldn't believe. It was in the 1960s, about the time that Frank began this enterprise. And I thought this was a wonderful thing to do. But at that time, looking for aliens was considered quixotic, to say the least. One might as well have professed an interest in looking for fairies. The prevailing view among scientists was that life on Earth is a freak accident, a unique freak, a chemical accident of such stupendous improbability that it would happen only once in the observable universe. You will often read statements like, the universe is so vast, there has to be life out there somewhere. Not true. There are about 10 to the power 22 planets within our observable volume, if we make a guesstimate, 10 to the 22. It seems like a big number, but it's a tiny number compared to the odds of shuffling together organic molecules into certain configurations. So if life started just by the random assembly of molecules that are being shuffled, it's very easy to beat those odds enormously. I won't bother to go into the arithmetic. But the point is that if the origin of life was a chemical accident, then the fact that the universe is vast by human standards makes not a jot of difference. We would still be unique in the universe. So did life start by accident? How did life begin? Darwin, interestingly, would not be drawn on this question. He said it is mere rubbish thinking at present of the origin of life. One might as well think of the origin of matter. Interesting comment, because physicists can now explain the origin of matter. So we've done that one. Can we explain the origin of life? No, we can't. Does that mean it's a miracle? No, it doesn't. What it means is we don't know. It happened a long time ago. In fact, we may never have a blow-by-blow account of how life on Earth got started. But we don't need that blow-by-blow account to address the issue of are we alone in the universe. All we want to know is, was it very probable or very improbable? Now, as I mentioned, when I was a student, everyone thought it was very improbable. Jacques Monod, for example, said, man at last knows that he is alone in the unfeeling immensity of the universe out of which he emerged only by chance. Jacques Monod won the Nobel Prize for his work unraveling the genetic code, and you can see he's seized here by a sort of Gallic nihilism, and he looks pretty miserable. It was very fashionable in the 60s to be a nihilist, and so it sort of fitted in. Although his book, Chance and Necessity, a very famous book, was published in the 70s. But Francis Crick, who I knew vaguely, was anything but a nihilist. He was a sort of cheerful, what Australians would call a larrikin. But he agreed. Life seems almost a miracle, he said, so many of the conditions that would be necessary for it to get going. So that was the view then. Life, freak accident, one example of it only. But today the mood has shifted. Let's take another Nobel Prize winner, Christian de Duve. His book Vital Dust contains the assessment that life is almost bound to arise wherever physical conditions are similar to those on Earth. And he's got this lovely phrase, life is a cosmic imperative. So it's a more cheerful view. Life is built into the nature of things in a fundamental way, and given time and given the right conditions, it's almost bound to occur. So we've got these two contrasting views, and during my lifetime, the pendulum has swung from being almost, it's a bizarre freak of no cosmic significance, to the universe is teeming with life and even intelligent life. But interestingly, the facts on the ground haven't changed. We're just as ignorant now about how life began as we were then. There are lots of theories and conjectures and scenarios, but we don't have a mechanism. We have a mechanism for evolution. It's a really important point. Once life gets going, of course, what we're interested in is, does it become intelligent? Does it make radio telescopes and so on? But at least we have a mechanism, the Darwinian mechanism of evolution. We can understand how it can happen. We don't yet understand, that is, we don't yet have a mechanism to turn non-life into life. We haven't got a life principle that shows us how it should happen, so that there's no way of putting in the odds. It's actually very hard to put in the odds as well for the evolutionary thing. What are the odds of wings? What are the odds of eyes? What are the odds of brains? We don't know how to do that calculation, but at least we're in with a chance. But not when it comes to life's origin. So my point is that the uncertainties in that factor F sub L blow all the rest out of the water. You can forget all the other uncertainties, like how long do these civilizations last and so on. We don't know those things because everything is dominated by the uncertainty in that one term. So if we want to make progress in this subject, that's the term we need to concentrate on. We need to test the idea of the cosmic imperative. How can we do that? How can we test it? Well, what we need is another sample of life, what Chris McKay at NASA Ames calls Life 2.0. We want a second Genesis, so we need a form of life that doesn't belong to our tree of life at all. It's a completely different form belonging to a different tree with a different origin. If we've got two samples of life, we know it's happened twice. It would seem very odd if we lived in a universe where life could happen twice, but no more times. So either it's going to be all over the place, or it's going to be unique. So we want to find Life 2.0. How do we find it? Where do we look? Well, one thing is to do SETI. Obviously, if that succeeds, we'll have our answer. But whilst we're waiting for the next 50 years, what else can we do? Well, we can hope that NASA one day funds the Terrestrial Planet Finder. That's a space-based system, really fancy thing, very expensive, which would have the capability of imaging those planets that Kepler is busy finding. And if it could image them in enough detail to analyze the gases in their atmospheres, then maybe we'll see the telltale signs of life. For example, oxygen might be a sign of life. What about industrial pollutants? That would be a sign of intelligent life or unintelligent life, depending on which way you look at industry and pollution. But this is going to be a long time coming. What else could we do? Well, what about going to Mars? Everybody thinks that Mars is a sort of Earth-like planet. It was more Earth-like in the past. Might there be life on Mars? Might Life 2.0 be there? Well, maybe, but there's a complication, and the picture tells it all. Mars takes a hit from time to time from a comet or an asteroid with enough force to blast Mars rocks all around the solar system, and some of these rocks come to Earth. I know that because I used to borrow one from my university in Australia and carry it with me for lectures just like this. And when I reached this point in the lecture, I'd reach in my pocket, pull it out and show it to the amazed audience, who would either freak out in surprise and take a very sort of mystical approach that this was a piece of the planet Mars, or say, oh, it's just a rock. Anyway, they won't let me borrow it anymore because it's worth millions and millions. But the point I'm trying to make is that cocooned inside a rock like that, life can hop from Mars to Earth, and some will go the other way as well. So Earth and Mars have been trading rocks. I think they've been trading life throughout their history. So they're really part of a single coupled ecosystem. Now, does that mean we've blown our only chance of finding Life 2.0? Not at all. Because what about looking on Earth itself? No planet is more Earth-like than Earth itself. So if life does arise readily in Earth-like conditions, shouldn't it have arisen many times over right here on our home planet? How do we know it didn't? Has anybody actually looked? Well, remarkably enough, until a few years ago, nobody had thought to try. There was a general assumption that all life on Earth is the same life. Now, it's true that all life on Earth so far studied is the same life. Same genetic code, same biochemical scheme, common ancestor. No doubt about that. But have we studied all of life? Not a bit of it. talk to a biologist, you'll be told that the vast majority of species on this planet are in fact microbes, and we've only just scratched the surface of the microbial realm. Now, if you go looking for microbes, you have to use biochemical techniques and molecular biology techniques, and they're very clever and very refined. But they're techniques customized to life as we know it. So if you go looking for A, you will find A, you won't find B. We want to find life 2.0. You won't find it with techniques customized to life 1.0. And you can't tell by looking what a microbe's made of. It's just a little thing. You've got to delve into its innards, study its biochemistry. And if the biochemistry doesn't work, chances are you will throw your microbe away. When I worked in Australia, I was at the Australian Centre for Astrobiology, and we had a thriving microbiology program with lots of PhD students, and they come to work early each day, and they beaver away with their microbes, and they try to get sequences and try to characterize them and try to look at microbes living in bizarre locations, so-called extremophiles. And from time to time, I get to work, and there'd be a poor girl in tears. What had happened? Her microbes weren't behaving themselves. She couldn't get a sequence, didn't know what to do, couldn't culture them. And so what happens to these microbes? Well, they get thrown away because you don't get a PhD by working on microbes that don't behave themselves. You go and get a different set of microbes. And so have we thrown the baby out with the bathwater? How do we know that intermingled among all those microbes we know and love could be some funny ones representing descendants of a second genesis, that is, belonging to a tree of life, but being life, but not as we know it? And how do we go find those things? Well, about 3 years ago, I convened a workshop at the Beyond Centre and gathered together about 20 scientists prepared to give this a go. And we came up with a sort of manifesto that is a strategy for where to look and what to look for. And I'm pleased to say that that search has begun, and some of it's even being funded. Where do you look? Well, this is one place, and I've only got one particular example to give you. We're calling this, by the way, the shadow biosphere, the idea that alongside all of the regular biosphere is another interpenetrating biosphere that's a shadow one, not because these microbes are invisible, but they have gone unrecognized. They would, in a sense, be aliens under our noses, or even up our noses, as I'm fond of saying. There's one place that we're looking for the shadow biosphere, shadow life, alien life, weird life, alternative life, life 2.0, whatever you want to call it. This is one place to look. Why are we looking there? Well, that's because a very clever young lady by the name of Felisa Wolf-Simon was a postdoc working with me at Arizona State University. She's now just across the bay at the US Geological Survey with Ron Ormond shown there. And they've been grabbing around in Mono Lake, getting the gunk from the bottom of the lake and looking at the microorganisms that live there. And the reason they're doing that, the reason that Felisa thinks that life 2.0 could lurk in the lake, is because she asks one of the questions we all ask is, if life were to form again, or there was a different form of life, how might it differ? Can we make an educated guess? Because the problem about looking for life 2.0 is we don't quite know what to look for. How might it differ? What might we look for? Well, one of the things we could do is to look for life where one of the elements that life likes, that known life uses, is replaced by another one. And devotees of Star Trek will know that carbon can be replaced by silicon. So could we look for silicon life? No, my chemist friends say that's just Star Trek. That's a silly thing to do. But there is an element, phosphorus, that could be replaced by another one, arsenic. So maybe there's a form of life with arsenic in place of phosphorus, and Mono Lake is laced with arsenic. It's a great place to go looking for arseno-life. And that's what Felisa is doing. And here are the organisms she's found. I met them yesterday for the first time. They were alive and wriggling under the microscope. I saw them. And they've been living on vast doses of arsenic and some glucose for months now. They have no phosphorus. They've been cultured and diluted from the original lake water many times. They've had no access to phosphorus that anybody can see, but they're still growing, still alive and wriggling around under the microscope. So this is like some sort of Lilliputian Agatha Christie story, but these are the survivors. Almost all other organisms will keel over and die, or whatever microbes do when they die. Don't think they keel over to flop around on the plate. Anyway, these microbes we don't know that this is life 2.0. She's hot on the trail, is all I can say. It could well be that this is just a bizarre adaptation of life 1.0. We're going to wait to see. But this is the sort of thing that I'm urging. And the book is really a wake-up call to scientists of all disciplines. Let's go look for things like alternative life. Because if we find 2 samples of life on Earth, 2 out of 2 on one planet, would mean that surely the universe is teeming with it. So this is the sort of thing we might discover in the next 10 years. This is something we really could discover. If life 2.0 is here on Earth, I believe we could find it fairly easily within a few years. You might be mystified as to why these microbes are called GFAJ. There at the bottom, I called Felisa a couple of weeks ago and said, what's this GFAJ then? What's that mean? And she said, oh, that stands for Give Felisa a Job. So if she finds arsenic life, she'll have no trouble about employment. So coming back then to the search for intelligence, this is only one way, this is one term in Drake's equation, but coming back to looking for intelligent life or intelligent technology, I believe we should look for general signatures of intelligence, anything out there that's fishy. For example, large-scale astroengineering. You saw this, you'd be left in no doubt that this was alien technology. One thing that has been around in the literature for a bit, and I was gratified to know when I took my little tour at Berkeley here today, up on the hill, Dan Wertheimer, who's part of the SETI project, kindly showed me around, and he said that people are continuing to look for these so-called Dyson spheres. So this is an idea of Freeman Dyson, the physicist, many years ago, that an energy-hungry civilization might create a shell of material completely enveloping its star in order to trap all of the heat and light coming from the star. So that's like a solar energy project with a vengeance. And if they should do that, then the telltale sign would be that this object would glow fiercely in the infrared part of the spectrum. And there are satellites that look for infrared objects, and are looking for them now. And some SETI astronomers have been analyzing that data to see if any of these might be Dyson spheres. So far, no luck. But we mustn't stop there. We need to put on our thinking caps and think of all the ways that alien technology might impact its environment. All technology leaves a footprint. Human technology at the moment is leaving a very noticeable footprint. It's called global warming, and it could be detected from a long way away. One might imagine that a civilization that could have been around for tens or even hundreds of millions of years would have a much bigger footprint that would extend beyond its home planet into its astronomical environment. And in the book, I give examples of the sort of things we look for. But the essential point is we can't really guess what a very advanced alien technology might be like. So what we don't want to do is think, well, what would we do in a few years? Or if somebody gave us unlimited money, what would we build? You know, should we look for that? We've got to really think outside the box on this subject. So anything that doesn't fit in, any anomaly, is a candidate for extraterrestrial technology. We mustn't forget our own astronomical backyard. A long time ago, Enrico Fermi, famous because he's on a postage stamp, is asked the question, where is everybody? The context of that question was then, this is about 1950, all the flying saucer reports, everybody thought that maybe Earth is being visited, but Fermi reasoned, well, why would they come now? You know, just as people got interested in extraterrestrial intelligence. Why would they happen to come at this particular time? Bit of a coincidence. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. They could have come at any time. And you might think, well, it's a long way to come. But it is a long way to come. Suppose you're 1,000 light years away. Even at the speed of light, it takes 1,000 years. But 1,000 years is nothing in a galaxy that's 13 billion years old. There's been plenty of time, if there's a civilization out there, mindful to do it, to spread out, either by colonization or by exploration, not necessarily flesh and blood beings flitting around, maybe robots, maybe nanobots, all sorts of ways that the galaxy could be explored. And Fermi said, well, they didn't come yet, so therefore they're not there. But what I'm doing in the book is resurrecting that and saying, how do we know they didn't come? Is it conceivable that Earth was visited? once you get away from this compression of timescales that most people are hung up on, well, we'd know if they were here in the last few thousand years. Supposing they came 100 million years ago. They came and they went, or maybe they came and they stayed, and maybe it was a colony that didn't survive, or they got bored and moved on, or maybe they were only interested in scientific experiments, or maybe they were just building spacecraft to move on to the next planet or something, all sorts of reasons. Could they have left a footprint for us to find? Could they have left a message in a bottle for us to find? Like the beacon, it's a one-way message. Well, maybe. If we came across something like this, of course, it would be obvious. We could find a calling card, but the point I want to make is we're talking about a calling card with a survival time of 100 million years at least. I've got some cards here in my pocket. Okay, that's not going to be here in another 100 million years, I can guarantee you. So 100 million years is a long time even by Raquel Welch standards. She was only 1 million years BC. So is there anything that would last for 100 million years? Well, not much, but some things would. Nuclear waste, for example. If they had nuclear reactors or just dumped nuclear waste from some spacecraft or something like that, we could find that. That would still be here. We could date it and we'd know when they came. If we found any plutonium, that would be a dead giveaway because plutonium doesn't last. It lasts a long time, many, many millions of years, but it wouldn't last from the formation of the solar system. A lump of plutonium would be a clincher. If they engaged in any large-scale mining or quarrying activities, in principle we could find that. It may be buried beneath overlying layers of rock, but we could, with geological surveys, we could find it. The idea that I like most is the message in the bottle. Maybe the bottle is living cells. Living cells contain a lot of information in the DNA, so maybe ET uploaded the message into the cells of terrestrial organisms, and they've just replicated and replicated and replicated. And this has immense survival possibilities. We've got genes inside us, unchanged for nearly 3 billion years. So it's possible to conserve a message and replicate it and spread it for a long period of time. We're sequencing genomes anyway. Why don't we just have a look, run an algorithm, and see if we can find a message from ET in the genomes of organisms? I suggested this at Microsoft the other day, and I said, you guys could probably write the code for this in an afternoon, and you can download the genomic data from the internet, run it through your code, and see if there's a sequence of prime numbers or some other message from ET along the lines of, hello Earthlings, have I got news for you? You won't get all of Encyclopedia Britannica, not Britannica, Galactica, or Britannica for that matter, in the genome of any terrestrial organism, but you could still get a pretty healthy message. It would still be an interesting message in a bottle. ET didn't need to have come here in person, or even its robots or probes didn't need to be here. They could have uploaded that by sending viruses. Viruses are always uploading messages into genomes. We've got about 20% of the human genome is viral messages that have been uploaded during evolutionary history. So those are some more of the ideas in the book. Now, I want to move on to the theological aspects of this, and the first thing I want to do is to say that this entire subject is plagued by a sort of anthropocentrism, and this is the latest offering from Hollywood. It's a great movie, a great visual experience, but in terms of, is E.T. going to look like that? It's frankly ridiculous, or like that. Are we going to be dealing with flesh and blood beings with a big head? I think the answer is almost certainly not. And the reason for that is because I believe that in the evolution of intelligence in the universe, the biological phase is just a transitory phase. Already on Earth, we can see we are passing the mantle of intellect to designed systems. I don't really like using words like computer and robot and so on. They're very 19th or even 20th century. They're not 21st century. We're talking about designed information processing, knowledge-based networked systems. I struggle in the book to come up with the right description. But you know what I mean. Google is smarter than any person on the planet. My desktop computer can outplay me in chess and outperform me in arithmetic any time. Soon, all of the intellectual heavy lifting will be done by these designed and distributed systems. And the great thing about network systems is that they're immortal. They can just bolt more bits on, they can repair, they can self-repair, they can design the next generation. And so over millions and millions and millions of years, this could, well, the sky's the limit. There are limits. For example, the speed of light is still a limit. But one could imagine the entire surface of a planet or a moon being covered with a sort of gigantic throbbing megabrain. So if we're taking a time scale of tens, hundreds of millions of years, billions of years, and we ask for a snapshot of intelligence in the universe, the outer reaches of the intellectual universe are going to be surely in a post-biological form. And that raises all sorts of interesting and disturbing questions. If we make contact with extraterrestrial intelligence, is it going to be something like this? Would an entity like this have the slightest interest in flesh and blood beings like ourselves? And what would we have to say to it? Many people think that if you reached this sort of stage, that you would lose interest in the physical universe because you'd have figured it all out, and you would retreat into cyberspace and spend your entire time proving ever more obscure mathematical theorems. We don't know what an entity like this would do. It's not obvious that it would contact us, though. It may still have a technological footprint. We could still look for something like this, even if we didn't know what it was thinking or what its motives were. However, there's a downside even to that. The holy grail of computing is the so-called quantum computer. This is not the time to get into quantum mechanics, but suffice it to say that quantum computers harness the quantum physics which is appropriate at the atomic level, and that if you could have complete control, which is unrealistic, but striking figure, complete control over only 300 atoms and hook them together, entangle them is the technical term, 300 atoms only, you would have computational resources which would outperform the entire observable universe if you commandeered it and turned it into a conventional computer. So only 300 atoms, and you've got something better than turning the whole universe into the next IBM machine. Frank Wilczek, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist, calls this quintelligence because surely such a thing with such enormously rich computational resources could be intelligent. Now, if quintelligence is the ultimate expression of intelligence in the universe, it may leave a negligible technological footprint. The best thing for quantum physics is to go somewhere cold. Heat messes up the delicate quantum phase relationships. You want to go cold. Where is cold? Between the galaxies, the intergalactic spaces. The temperature's only about 2.7 degrees above absolute zero. That's where quintelligence would lurk. It would need some life support systems around it. Maybe it would occupy something the size of a bus. So we'd be looking for a bus in intergalactic space that wouldn't be giving off very much energy. It likes to be cold. I think that's a lost cause myself. So let me turn to the subject of the theological ramifications of what I've been saying, because that will be of great interest to people here. How does this view of life and intelligence change our understanding of our relationship between human beings and God, whatever that God might be, and whatever religion you might subscribe to, or none? I'm posing 4 tough questions for theologians. I'm not going to pull any punches here, because I think they've been in a state of denial, and I think I want to provoke them to confront these questions. And some of them are gentle, and some of them are not. The first thing is the good news concerns the cosmic imperative. What we really want to know, and this is a sort of trans-theological question. This is a meta-religious question because it concerns all human beings. Even atheists must be intrigued to know whether there is something bigger than themselves, whether they are part of a scheme that includes the emergence of life and mind as a fundamental part of the workings of the universe. In other words, that it would be nice to know that we're not just freaks as well, quirky little accidents that have occurred as a byproduct of processes in some little corner of the universe, just chemical scum, as Stephen Hawking has called it. We want to know, is life a meaningless cosmic accident, chemical scum, unique to Earth, or is it the expected product of intrinsically bio-friendly laws? That is life just an incidental feature, life and mind just an incidental feature or a fundamental feature? I've always passionately believed it's a fundamental feature, partly for the reason, I'll just say briefly in passing, I believe it's a fundamental feature because I think our ability not only to observe the universe, but to understand it through science and mathematics, points to something very deep, a very deep connection between the nature of the human mind and the nature of reality or the nature of the cosmos we inhabit. I think it's not a trivial fact that we understand the universe. And you don't have to be conventionally religious to find that a deeply spiritual statement. So there is, just in finding life 2.0, big spiritual stakes involved in that. So for that reason, I think a universe teeming with life is, in some sense, a more spiritual universe than one where life is just a meaningless accident. The next thing is that would we share with aliens a common sense of, say, right and wrong? Those people who are moral relativists will argue that our ethical code is just a product of evolution or social convention or something like that. There are no absolute rights and wrongs. But of course we don't know because we've only got one sample of a species that is able to engage in such philosophical discussions. We had another one, we had two, and we shared some basic morality, then we could designate those things in common to be, as it were, fundamental, law-like, perhaps, part of the natural outworkings of the universe. How about post-biological intelligence? Would quintelligence, or the gigantic throbbing mega-brain covering a whole planet, also be altruistic? Would it think to itself, we must leave those humans in peace, even though we might want some of their resources? Or wouldn't they give a damn about us? Don't know. Then if we've enlarged our view of the universe, we now think of, if we buy into this cosmic imperative, a universe teeming with life, teeming with intelligent life, we're just the new kids on the block, we're just one in a vast array of sentient beings of all manners, all shapes and sizes, all different forms, different intellects, different motives, different purposes. A wonderful mosaic, a potpourri of sentience and intelligence. That's an uplifting view. Is there a sort of cosmo-theology that would encompass all of that? Is there something that would elevate us above the terrestrial theology that we've had so far and be transportable to that bigger setting? Some of my theology colleagues have tried to make that transition. All of the well-known terrestrial religions are, of course, very ancient and stem from a time when mankind's vision of our place in the universe was very limited. 2,000 years ago, most people thought they were at the center of the universe and humans were the pinnacle of creation. If we take this cosmic view, that obviously changes things dramatically. And so how well does that transformation fit into the faith traditions that are the dominant ones on this planet? It's easy to be inspired, I think, and many scientists, Einstein said he had a cosmic religious feeling. He wasn't conventionally religious, but he shared in this sense of wonder, the sense of awe, that this is a magnificent universe put together in an ingenious way of which we're a part, and our comprehension of the universe is surely something deeply significant. So I think many scientists share that point of view. So the question is, what are we to do with the existing world faiths? Do we drag them kicking and screaming into the 21st century and get them to buy into this cosmic view? Do we let them continue in their traditional way? Maybe they'll wither and die. Maybe they'll be replaced by new religions and new cosmotheology. I don't know, but I think these are really important questions. And I think they're really fun questions to address, particularly for CTNS, poised as it is at the intersection of these two great intellectual traditions. But I want to finish by coming to the really provocative one, which is to the focus on Christianity and what it means for Christians if there are advanced alien beings out there. Because I want to address the question, what does salvation mean? Salvation is, of course, the centerpiece of Christianity. What does salvation mean in an astrobiological context? Now let me say right at the outset, here we are, there's our saintly alien beings. Why are they saintly? Well, I mentioned that they would be quite likely to be well in advance of us scientifically and technologically. They should, not necessarily, but could at least, be well in advance of us ethically too. So we might be dealing with very, very good beings out there in the universe that would make us look awful by comparison. And the question is, are these beings to be saved? And if so, how? And how do we fit that within the framework of Christianity? Now, I should say that Islam doesn't have a problem with this. The Quran explicitly mentions extraterrestrial beings, and it's often pointed out to me by Islamic scholars. And this quotation from the Quran is one of many that makes reference to that. I have to say that I think Judaism doesn't have too much of a problem either, but Islam has this explicit mention. But Christianity is in a bind, and you would do well to tread carefully, because Giordano Bruno stepped into this controversy and was burnt at the stake for many heresies, but among them were espousing the idea of many inhabited worlds. Well, after that episode, there was actually a lively discussion within the Christian church between theologians, scholars, scientists, although in those days the term hadn't been coined, about if there are advanced sentient beings, and they generally believed that they were out there because they discovered other planets, they thought they must be inhabited, were they to be saved? How were they to be saved? This was Christian Europe. How were they to be saved? Well, one way is, of course, multiple incarnations. The centerpiece of Christianity is that God became incarnate in the figure of Jesus Christ, took on human flesh to save humankind. Not to save the dolphins or the chimpanzees or the whales, however noble those creatures may be, but Homo sapiens specifically. Now, already, of course, many Christians realize that the definition Homo sapiens is a little bit fuzzy. So the definition Homo is fuzzier still. What about Homo neanderthalis, Neanderthal man? Are they to be saved through the incarnation? Or the hobbits that have recently been discovered that seemingly inhabited the island of Flores were a separate species altogether and might have been around in historic times, even after the time of Christ. Are they to be saved? Who gets to be saved by the human incarnation? Well, presumably not the little green men by that mechanism. A theologian friend of mine who should probably not be named once said it could only happen by God taking on little green flesh to save little green men. Of course, not everybody believes that. So let me give you some quotes of scholars throughout history. So Thomas Paine wrote on this subject. He says, it's not taboo. These days, people feel uncomfortable discussing what I'm saying now. It wasn't taboo. He said the Son of God, and sometimes God himself, this is if there were multiple incarnations, would have nothing else to do than to travel from world to world in an endless succession of death, with scarcely a momentary interval of life. He who thinks he believes in both, that is, extraterrestrial beings and the incarnation, has thought little of either. So he didn't like the idea of multiple incarnations. William Whewell in 1850, now he's the man who coined the term scientist. So he's a great scholar, master of Trinity College, as Newton was before and Martin Rees is now, states it very carefully and very clearly. Let me just read it out because I think it just encapsulates what I'm trying to say here. So the central message of Christianity is this: God has interposed in the history of mankind in a special and personal manner. What are we to suppose concerning the other worlds which science discloses to us? Is there a like scheme of salvation provided for all of them? Our view, meaning his and the conventional view of the Anglican Church of that time, our view of the Saviour of man will not allow us to suppose that there can be more than one Saviour, God's only begotten Son. And the Saviour coming as a man to men is so essential a part of the scheme that to endeavour to transfer it to other worlds and to imagine there something analogous as existing is more repugnant to our feeling than to imagine those other worlds not to be provided with any divine scheme of salvation. So in other words, either there's no sentient beings out there or they're damned. Even in recent times, a physicist and astronomer as distinguished as E.A. Milne, Oxford theoretical physicist, and even has a universe named after him, the Milne universe, had the following to say. God's most notable intervention in the actual historical process, according to the Christian outlook, was the incarnation. Was this a unique event, or has it been reenacted on each of the countless number of planets? The Christian would recoil in horror from such a conclusion. So there we are. We cannot imagine the Son of God suffering vicariously on each of a myriad of planets. The Christian would avoid this conclusion by the definite supposition that our planet is in fact unique. What then of the possible denizens of other planets if the incarnation occurred only on our own? Well, some years before, Emanuel Swedenborg addressed this issue too in a curious little book in which there's a chapter called The Reasons Why the Lord Willed to be Born on Our Earth and Not on Any Other. And he solved this problem in a very neat way. He had other inhabited worlds, and he had very good Martians. If you read his account of Martians, they're really nice people. But that's the point. He said that the reason they can be saved is because they too are human. So he had Homo sapiens throughout the universe. So that got around the problem about the incarnation being for one species. The aliens were the same species. Nobody would believe that anymore. Let's come a bit more up to date. In this day and age, there are not many theologians prepared to engage this particular issue, but some do. And I'd just like to quote one or two of them before closing and then picking up the discussion with Ted Peters, because he's one of the people who actually is prepared to step into this hornet's nest. Erna McMullen here, he says, concerning multiple incarnations, answers could range from yes, certainly, to certainly not. My own preference would be a cautious maybe. So he's sort of sitting on the fence there. What about George Coyne, former director of the Vatican Observatory? George is great on this subject because he is, among many other things, an astrobiologist. So he's thought a lot about the significance of life elsewhere. And he's prepared to sort of wriggle a bit, but, get in there. Let me show you what he says. God chose a very specific way to redeem human beings. He sent his only son, Jesus, to them, and Jesus gave up his life so that human beings would be saved from their sin. Did God do this for extraterrestrials? Theologians must accept a serious responsibility. So now he says we can't duck this. We can't be in denial. They must accept a serious responsibility to rethink some of the fundamental realities within the context of religious belief. Can't just dodge it. We've got to rethink it. What is a human being? The definition of Homo sapiens, again, it's a really important point. What does it mean to be human? Could Jesus Christ, fully a human being, exist on more than one planet at one time? He's not offering us the answers, but he's at least prepared to engage the question. So let me finish, and then we'll have a discussion. What I've tried to do is to show you that SETI is a fun subject, it's a frustrating subject, it's tantalizing. The thought of vast cosmic wisdom, only one radio message away, is something that most people find compelling. But so far, we just have an eerie silence. Why do we do this thing called SETI? What is it that compels us? Is it just a waste of time and money? Can it be taken seriously? I think it's really important that we do SETI, even if we just go on getting an eerie silence, and even if all my other schemes to track down ET should come to nothing. And the reason I think it's important is precisely for the issues that I've just been discussing. It forces us to confront questions like, what does it mean to be human? What is life? What is intelligence? What would post-intelligence be like? Is there a life principle or a cosmic imperative? Do we live in a universe in which life and mind are deeply embedded in the nature of things, or are they quirky little incidental features? Should we take better care of our planet? Are we the only planet on which the flame of reason burns? These are questions it's healthy that we should ask anyway, and particularly young people. And I'd like to close by giving the words of Frank Drake, with whom I began this presentation, because Frank, I think, sums it up very well. He says that SETI is really a search for ourselves. We're looking in the sky at the trajectory of human destiny written in the stars, because where E.T. has trodden, we shall follow. What lies in store for us is surely what lay in store for them in the past. If it turns out that the silence is eerie because they have all destroyed themselves, then that's a very sobering thought about our own future. If it's eerie simply because we're listening in the wrong place or doing the wrong thing, then there's a hope that we may yet find a universe brimming with life. So SETI is a search for ourselves, who we are, and where we fit into this magnificent universe of ours. Thank you. Well, what do we do? Do I stand? Do I sit? Right.
So let me ask Melissa to collect the questions that you might have written down, and then we'll have a response from Ted, and then a chance for Paul and Ted to respond to your questions. So my good friend Ted Peters is professor of systematic theology at the Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary, part of the GTU. Ted has been an ally, a supporter, and a leader of this field of theology and science for decades. He has become a national spokesperson for issues surrounding evolution from a Christian perspective, called theistic evolution, as opposed to intelligent design. He's been involved in the complex conversations around stem cell research and the ethical questions that genetic engineering and research pose. Ted has written a book called The Evolution of Terrestrial and Extraterrestrial Life, Where in the World is God? It's an excellent book. I recommend you look at it. It's a very careful, scholarly assessment of the theological implications of the discovery, the possible discovery of ET, and the response that we might make as Christians. And there's really no one I can think who's better equipped to respond to Paul's fascinating lecture than Ted Peters. Please join me in welcoming Ted.
I'm very wide of the mark. My only contribution to this field is to point out something that is almost always overlooked by people working in this area, which is you don't have to replicate structures to get evolution going. You just have to replicate information. And I'll give you an example. If I download a file from a memory stick, put it in the USB port, download the file, the computer doesn't make a copy of the memory stick. It just makes a copy of the pattern. So if we have any system that copies patterns with variation and selection, we can do the Darwin thing from the word go. So I've speculated about the idea of spin glasses and quantum replicators, which would all make everything happen much, much faster. But, you know, this is just one crazy idea among many. We really haven't a clue. Now, one of these has to be a mechanism to go from non-knife to knife, but all of them, I think, are deeply problematic. And within the community of people that work on this, you will find them very split. So I was just last week having dinner with Harold Morowitz, George Mason University, who believes that everything started with metabolism, with autocatalytic chemical cycles, and the replicating information and cells and so on came much later. So they're very, very deep divisions, but they all have the problem not only of finding a suitable setting in which this takes place, but all of the many, many conditions that have to be present in order for it to work. Nobody has come up with a truly robust route from matter to life, and that's what we want. So we still don't know what it is. Okay, SETI, perhaps more than any other scientific endeavor, remains open to a wide range of possible discoveries of types of detected signals. In the past 45 years, a variety of unexpected and transient phenomena have been discovered by astronomers, pulsars, for example. SETI scientists have been responsible for discovering none of these. Why? And I think, actually, it's a very good point. Very good question, because SETI, as it's done so far, focuses on a very particular strategy, namely looking for narrowband directed radio signals. That's what they do very well, and that's what they're paid to do. So we can't complain if they refine it and push ahead with that particular technique. But of course, it does mean they're unlikely to make much progress with other things. The pulses I talked about, they're not really in a good position to evaluate that. And so, as far as I know, it may not. let me say that a lot of SETI searches piggyback on more conventional astronomical observations. Now, I can't be sure that during a time when a SETI search has been running, that the other types of observations have not led to something new. But as far as I know, specifically doing SETI has not led so far to anything new. Of course, what they're looking for is something very specific. It's not just, I want to broaden the search because I think we should look for anything new, anything fishy, as I put it. At the moment, they're very focused. So it's a good question because it's part of my criticism. Okay, do they have a DNA sequence for the monolake microbes where we replace phosphorus with arsenic? I'm not at liberty to say. But watch this space. You have assumed that advanced scientific prowess and capabilities should correspond to an advanced ethical system. This doesn't seem to jibe with the data that we have from civilizations we've observed like ours. Okay. So are we uniquely fallen in the universe? I imagine that if there are civilizations that have arisen through biological processes, Darwinian evolution, competition, and so on, they're going to encounter many of the same problems about the compromise between altruism, which has a biological basis, and competition, which has a biological basis, and will struggle to develop ethical systems and so on. I suppose I'm working on the basis that if they really didn't get it right, the chances are they wouldn't survive. They'd blow themselves up, so that if we're dealing with survivors, with surviving civilizations, they'll have learned a trick or two, they will have cleaned up their act. We will be dealing with organisms who, or post-biological entities that have learned to come to terms with their own failings, I believe. So I think it's not unreasonable that if we make contact, that it's not going to be with a planet rent by warfare. I think such a planet's not going to last. Civilizations won't last. Okay, null result is never useless for a well-designed science experiment. Okay, what are the upper limits on ET set by 50 years of SETI? The SETI people do this. They can extrapolate a bit using Moore's law with the hope that, because SETI follows its own version of Moore's law, and so they can work out that within 50 years, I don't know, 70 years or something, they could have surveyed the entire galaxy to the level of sensitivity that they're currently surveying the nearby region. And so if they did that and still drew a blank, I suspect the funding might dry up. But in terms of putting a limit on it, it's a little bit hard to do that because they might have the sensitivity to pick up a signal from over there, but just be looking on the wrong day or something. There are all sorts of reasons why they may not have succeeded. That's why I think we need to broaden the search. There's a second question on this card. Vision of ultimate intelligence is a fanciful, gnostic vision that does away with culture, diversity, nature, any sense of aesthetic beauty. Well, I would challenge the aesthetic beauty. We don't know. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It assumes that the mathematical and rational is the ultimate experience. Not necessarily. The mathematical and rational, I think, is at the forefront of this discussion because it's the only common currency, the only common language with which we could converse with a truly alien mind. 11 is a prime number, is a statement that is true whether you're a human being or a gigantic throbbing megabrain. It's simply a true statement. So that does form a way of coming to terms with it. We can't say what the culture of post-biological intelligence, if we take that extreme case, quintelligence, we can't say that it doesn't have a culture, except in as much as when we use the term culture, we mean collective experiences of individuals. As I pointed out with being able to network information processing systems, so we might not be dealing with individuals, not with so much with a community, but with a singular entity. Not sure what culture means in that context. So we could be here all night, I think, going into these questions of what a truly alien mind would be like. It seems to me that we're assuming that life will evolve in generally the same way on other planets as on Earth. Well, I don't know who the we is there, but certainly the SETI search is predicated on the assumption that Earth is typical and that one might find the same general trend. In my book, as Ted kindly mentioned, I unpack those assumptions, challenge them. And we can hope that maybe there will be that pattern, but we have no law to say that evolution follows a pattern. Richard Dawkins famously says nature cannot look ahead, that evolution is blind, it's not groping towards anything. So if there is progress in evolution, then this is a principle which augments the traditional Darwinian principle. We don't know whether there is such a principle or not, but it would be a profound discovery if there is. How can we say that life will only form on rocky terrestrial planets? No, we can't. That's absolutely right. I was talking earlier about my crazy theory that maybe life started with quantum information replicators. The best place for that is on an interstellar grain spinning in a magnetic field. So we absolutely don't know that life started on terrestrial planets because we don't know, haven't a clue how life started, and we don't know the how of it, and we don't know the where of it. The simplest assumption is that it was a terrestrial type setting, but that's just the default option, really. We really haven't a clue. And that ours is the only form of life, or the easiest to find. Well, I've been talking about search for life 2.0, so, but nevertheless, I'm still thinking in terms of chemical life, cellular structure, and so on. We can imagine all sorts of bizarre types of life, plasma life, and life made out of self-gravitating systems and all sorts of stuff. If you read science fiction, you'll find all that out there. We have our work cut out, I think, trying to understand just sort of routine chemical type life. And so I've shied away in the book from just getting too general. But we must be open to the fact that there may be many different ways to intelligence is what we're after. It's not necessarily to life. Many different ways of reaching intelligence. Must life 2.0 be mortal? The thing about immortal life, I had an interesting discussion with a synthetic biologist called Drew Endy on this, and I said, well, why do we have to die? Why, take a cell, for example. Why do even cells have to die? Except cancer cells, of course, can be immortal. Why do cells have to die? Could there be a form of life where cells don't die? Could there be a cell out there that isn't going to die? It just is self-repairing, perpetually self-repairing. And then, of course, we were struck by the obvious thought, well, if it's out there somewhere, we're never going to know, because the whole point about death is you have to replicate to outmaneuver it. And so the reason that our planet is full of life is because it's full of organisms that replicate and replicate and replicate and multiply, and that's why we notice them. If you don't have death, there's no need to have replication. Replication is the answer to evading death. So if you don't have replication, if there's one immortal cell, well, I'm sure it's very happy, but we're not going to know about it. Could life 2.0 be a property of the universe that remains constant? Well, I don't want to belabor this life 2.0. It's simply a way of saying it's a form of life that is different from the life that we know. 2.0 is just Chris McKay's way of saying, it's a very definitely different way of doing it, but you assume that there's 3.0 and 4.0 and there's even life 1.1. And so the whole idea is that there would be a vast number of origins of life and a vast number of trees of life. So we don't want to think that there's our life and then there's this other really funny one that's got weird properties that we could get hung up on. It's just another way of doing life. If there were a second Genesis, bacteria, microbes on Earth, why would it not have evolved into multicellular organisms? Very good point. And why have we not found bigger organisms? We can ask the same question of prokaryotes. So all multicellular life are eukaryotic, that is, they have complex cells with nuclei. We don't see bacteria forming colonies that have true organ differentiation and become truly multicellular. They will form organized structures and biofilms and do interesting things, collective things, but true multicellularity is restricted to eukaryotes. So we don't even understand that. So it would be no surprise to have another form of life. We already know two forms of life as we know it that don't, for some reason, form multicellular life. So there's probably a fundamental reason for that. I don't think anybody knows the reason for that, but if we can already see two examples of microbes that don't do the multicellular thing, it's not hard to believe there may be others which are life not as we know it that don't do the multicellular thing. If extremophiles looked very different, how do you know they truly represent second Genesis and not a second branch of organisms? Absolutely. So in the book, of course, and I just bracket this. So we find these wonderful bugs, maybe in Mono Lake, maybe somewhere else. How do we know it's not just a hitherto overlooked exotic side branch on the known tree of life? How do we know it's a separate tree with a separate origin? Well, first, pragmatically, I say let's find the microbes first and then start arguing about it, but the devil will be in the details, as always. It will depend on just how different is this putative life 2.0 from life 1.0. And I'll bracket this by giving you two examples. Supposing we found a form of life that had all the same good stuff as we've got, amino acids, proteins and so on, nucleic acids, it just had a different genetic code. All known life has the same genetic code. Suppose we find a form of life with different genetic code, then for my money, that wouldn't be life 2.0. It would be just a side branch on the known tree of life. It would have evolved away from the last common ancestor of all life we know so far at a prior point. And there will be an ancestor further back that will be the common ancestor of those two. Now let me give you the contrast example. One of the things we're looking for is mirror life. So this is life with the opposite chirality. Physicists will know that term. It means if you look at the molecules we're made of, all our amino acids are left-handed, all our sugars are right-handed. That's why DNA is a right-handed spiral. In a mirror, it's around the other way, left-handed spiral. Now, the laws of physics don't care left from right when it comes to chemistry. So if life happened again, it could maybe pick the other-handedness next time. Maybe not, because there may be some other reasons, like our environment, that favors one over the other. But we can imagine that life could do it the other way. If we found mirror life, everything reversed, it would be very hard to see how it could have a common origin. And the simple reason that to get life, you need complexity, and you can't build complex molecules without, at some stage, quite low down, of making a decision, is the thumb going to be on this side or on that side? And once you break that symmetry, you've got to stick with it for that particular system. I say it's a little bit like the rule of the road. In Britain, we drive on the correct side of the road. In the United States, they drive on the wrong side of the road. But it doesn't matter, left side, right side, so long as everybody does the same. And I always cite the example of Sweden, a heroic nation that one day, January the 1st, I can't remember, 1973 or something, decided to switch from left to right. And being Swedes, it all happened very smoothly, no disaster. Imagine that happening in Italy. So if we found mirror life, I think that would be a classic example of life 2.0. And we're on the trail of it because my wife had this wonderful idea of let's make a culture medium of mirror soup. Because you can buy this stuff. You can buy, left-handed glucose and right-handed amino acids. It's quite expensive, but not horrendously so. NASA are doing this experiment at the Marshall Space Flight Center, and they're finding microorganisms that can eat this mirror soup, but they're not the mirror life that we're looking for. They seem to be clever organisms that, by some mysterious mechanism, it's not understood, can seem to digest it after a fashion. Okay, I need to, nearing the end here. On your religious point, that's namely Christianity, why do you take salvation as a literal concept and not as a metaphor? Very, very interesting. I was having a discussion with an Anglican priest in London doing my book launch, and I said, well, come on, how do you deal with this incarnation issue? What does salvation mean to you? And he said, well, I can interpret it in the following way, that I think salvation means the destiny of mankind, and it could mean the destiny of mankind on this planet, that we overcome all of our trials and tribulations and we become a really good society in the future. That drawing the inspiration from the life of Jesus Christ, we achieve salvation through our own efforts and moral guidance and so on. So he saw salvation as a terrestrial phenomenon in some way, and not going to heaven or something of that sort. Perhaps it makes more sense to answer the question number 3 by reference. I can't remember what number 3 was. Let's just see. By reference to world theology rather than to Christian theology. Absolutely. The Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences prides itself in not sticking to a narrow Christian agenda. And so that's why I think this is the ideal forum to take up these issues. What do you think of the answer? Yes, Buddhism is such a cosmotheology. Yes, after a fashion. Is Buddhism a theology? As I understand it, Buddhists don't believe in God, so I'm not sure about the definition there. But I'd like to that point, because Richard Pecunia emailed me a question related to this, which is that if we had a civilization out there that had evolved over millions and millions and millions of years, would be so far advanced, and we're communicating with them, Would it be like communicating with God? And how would we know that it isn't God? What sort of entity would we be dealing with? And it's true that if we're talking about something like quintelligence, we're dealing with a type of intellect which, at least at the intellectual, if not the technological level, is probably more powerful than almost all of the gods in human history, but not, as Ted pointed out, more powerful, or at least not as grand as the transcendent God of monotheism, the God that is outside of space and maybe outside of time as well, transcending the universe, not a natural God. Whether you could tell whether you were dealing with a natural God or a supernatural God, I really don't know. I guess you could ask. Final question then. The question of multiple incarnations bypasses the question of whether other species suffered a fall. It's possible that they don't need to be saved because they're, as it were, saved already, born in perfection, something of that sort. Very hard for me to imagine how any sort of natural evolutionary process would have produced beings that never had conflicts. I don't know. There's no logical reason why you couldn't make a transition from matter to life to mind without going through the human experience. There could be something very, very different. So maybe, I think, is the answer to that. And finally, there is an obscure theory that God intended to become incarnate to share his fellowship with us. If it was only after the fall that the incarnation, it was only after the fall that the incarnation had it was having trouble with the handwriting. It was only after the fall that the incarnation had to die to redeem us. I think it would be very remiss of me, scientist and totally failed theologian. I would never be accepted in any self-respecting church or religious organization. Quite wrong for me to, I think, pronounce on that deep theological question. Bob or Ted may want to take up on it, but I think at that point I will plead ignorance and say good night, or what happens next? What's next in the proceedings? We say good night.
We'll be closing in a minute, and afterwards I believe Paul will be around to have further conversation and do a book signing. I encourage you to have a chance to talk to Paul and get his wonderful book and pursue these questions further. Let me remind you, too, of tomorrow at 9 o'clock. We begin with registration. 9:30 the conference begins. There are two groups presenting tomorrow. In the morning, Chris Southgate and Andrew Robertson are speaking on the question, how complex life evolved by interpreting its environment, and how that ability offers humans an openness to the environment and to the transcendent. Now, let me say, they weren't able to be here because their flight was canceled from the UK, but they have spent time with their AV people to produce a video presentation of their work and probably a Skype link. We're particularly lucky that Terry Deegan, who is a world expert on emergence in physical and biological systems, is here tonight and tomorrow. He's part of the team, and he'll be also interpreting their work. So I encourage you to come tomorrow, 9 o'clock, for a coffee and to begin the conversation. 9:30 the conference begins. And then in the afternoon, Warren Brown and Michael Spezio, who are here tonight, are going to be speaking to the question, what neuroscience can teach us about human values in the transcendent source. Michael and Warren, you want to raise your hands so people can identify you and say hello after we end. Let me suggest that as we leave, Melissa, which door do you want people to go to sign? Signings over here? Great. So if you want to talk and sign books with Paul on the right, otherwise if you leave over here on the left, might make things a little simpler. I want to close by thanking the staff for organizing this conference and the church for providing a wonderful setting. I'm appreciative of the students who are here who helped with this conference and will be there tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time. I'm particularly appreciative for Ted Peters, who have responded to Paul's wonderful presentation. But let's end with a great round of applause and thanks to Paul Davies.